So a very good evening to all of you. And so today is this case presentation thing that we're going to do. And with me is Dr. Naresh Butula, who's a fellow in the breast unit at Max Hospital, Patparganj. And he will be presenting the case. And just for all those who have joined, just to tell you that this is not the last case that is being presented. And this is a continuous learning process. I always believe that I'll land up learning more than teaching, because like learning is always a two-way process, and as we go along we will keep learning. And I'm sure there could be things that I may get wrong, and you can always correct me. I'm completely open to that. And Naresh is our fellow in the breast unit, and I'm sure he will be able to take you through this case and bring up some interesting points as we go along. Okay, Naresh, over to you.
Okay.
So
Yeah, you can start sharing your slides.
Yes, madam. Yes.
So while he's putting up the slides, I must say that, what Dr. Radhakrishna has managed to do is something that we always aspired for as students and never really managed to get there. I think there's such a huge bounty of knowledge that Dr. Radhakrishna has been able to share. I think he has done all his good karma for life with just this, this wonderful platform that he's given to students and everybody to be learning from each other. So I think it's a great platform.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for your support. Yeah, Naresh, you can start.
Sir. Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. Today we are going to present the case of breast lump. My patient, Mrs. A.S., 50-year-old lady, a housewife hailing from South Delhi, came with chief complaints of lump in the right breast since 3 months.
So Naresh, when you're talking about, we have to look at everything that is asked of a patient has a reason as to why you ask. So you've said that this is a lady, she's a 50-year-old, and she's come to you with a complaint of a lump in the right breast, and a lot of things start coming to your mind. So if you ask a 50-year-old, what is the consequence of age in a lady who comes with a lump in the breast?
Respect to age, a younger age group is more towards the fibroadenoma or fibroadenosis. With as the age progresses, like perimenopausal and menopausal, it is more with relevant to the presentation of a carcinoma.
So right. So if you have a younger person, so in the 20s and 30s, you would think that the risk of it being cancer is much lower than you would see in a 50-year-old. So if you see the maximum number of cases of breast cancer, almost 77%, 75 to 77% of breast cancers happen in the 45 to 60 age group. And in the younger age group, so that is why, it is important for us to impress upon people because most of the people think that if I have a lump, it is cancer. That's not true. So if you have a young woman in the age of, in the 20s or the 30s, they should be encouraged to come and get it investigated, because in all probability, it is going to be a benign lump. But in the background of this, in our country, we see about 10 to 15% of patients who are under the age of 50, or under the age of 40 rather, under the age of 40 who come with cancer. So we don't want to miss those people. So that is the reason why all lumps should be investigated. Okay. So what does the duration tell you? If you say that you've said that this lump has been there for 3 months, so had it been a week-long history, or had it been 3 days, how would your thinking change?
A short duration of 3 days or within a week will usually we think of the inflammatory things, right? Like a breast abscess.
Right. So a short duration means it could be anything else. It could be a cyst, which is, she might be premenstrual, it has grown in size, and it could be an inflammatory thing. It could be a form of, localized mastitis. It could be periductal mastitis. So all those options should come to your mind when you see that it is a very short history, especially if the patient presents with pain. Go on.
Coming to the history of present illness, Patient was apparently all right 3 months back. To start with, she noticed a pea-sized lump in her right breast, which was initially small and gradually progressed to the present size. There is no history of pain associated. There is no history of nipple discharge. There is no history of ulceration over the swelling and no history of recent change in the nipple.
Okay, so let's just stop here. So you
Yes,
you said that there are people who object to pea-sized lumps and all that, but I think it is a fairly good idea to try and give us a sense as to what it felt like, because I remember our professor saying, you say lemon-sized lump, so my lemon is big, your lemon is small, so what is the size? So so that is a variation in the way people ask for it. But I think you get a reasonably good idea. What you're trying to say is what was really small has definitely grown twice or three times or four times in size. So that is what you want to say. So when you say pain, how often? So pain, if there is pain associated, you're obviously thinking of inflammatory conditions. But is it true that breast cancer never presents with pain?
no, madam. It has uh, it does present with pain in some cases. When
So
there,
some cases meaning, so in about 7 to 8% of patients, the first presenting symptom in breast cancer also could be pain. But by and large, pain is associated with other conditions like you've already mentioned. So when you say nipple discharge, what kind of nipple discharge are you looking for?
with, if
What are
it's
the different kinds of nipple discharge that you would see?
it can be milky, the that is usually present in the case of galactoria, or a greenish discharge, a bloody discharge, purulent.
Okay, so there is a certain significance to how this nipple discharge presents also. So if you have got multiple ducts pouring out, milk, or it could be ductectasia, or it could be a greenish discharge coming out from multiple ducts, that should not concern you as much as a spontaneous single duct serous or serosanguinous discharge. That should definitely alert you to investigating the patient more carefully. Not to take it away, suppose there is a 25-year-old who's presenting with bilateral galactoria and is not breastfeeding, um, then you need to investigate that patient as to why is she having, because she's not married, there is no sexual intimacy, and there are no kids in the thing. Then you should wonder as to why this patient is having nipple discharge, milky discharge from both sides. So you must look for history of various drugs that she may be taking, which could, because a lot of your H2 antagonists and a lot of your anti-epileptic medication, all that can give rise to discharge from both the nipples. If that is not the case, then you should be looking at something more sinister, especially for prolactin. Serum prolactin is high, then you must be looking for things like pituitary adenoma. So that is how you should look at it. But if it is a single duct discharge, then obviously you're looking at single duct spontaneous. If you express discharge, that does not fit into any criteria. But if it is a single duct discharge, which is spontaneous, then you should be looking for other pathologies within the breast. Ulceration over the swelling, why would you, why do you want to know?
It can be related to a neglected case, or in a rapidly growing lump like Phyllodes tumor of breast. Sometimes it presents with a ulceration.
Yeah, so the history of a phyllodes tumor, what would be the history of a phyllodes tumor?
A rapidly growing tumor, which was a long-standing rapidly. It was initially a long-standing.
So there may be a lump which has suddenly grown in size, which was about 2 centimeters in size about 2 months ago, and now it has grown to 6 centimeters. So that is a very classical history of a phyllodes. But here you have said that it has gradually progressed to the size. So here the possibility of that happening is low. Like you said, you can get ulceration of the skin even in a benign phyllodes tumor. But then ulceration is also associated with abscesses which may have drained spontaneously. And ulceration could also be present in a case of cancer. So when you say recent changes in nipple, what is in your mind?
We can look any change like ulceration or nipple retraction, nipple fissure or cracks over the nipples. These are
And
the various presentations.
sorry.
These are the various presentations.
So, what about encrustation?
And
What about weeping from the surface of the nipple? All those things are also part of the changes that one can observe in a nipple. So, one, like you said, ulceration, yes, maybe. But ulceration, then again, you have to ask for specific history. There is ulceration. Does it become okay in between? So the patient gives you a very classical history if you're thinking in terms of a Paget's disease, because she'll say, well, I used to have a mild ulceration on the surface of the nipple, and then it used to, my clothes used to stain, and then there would be a crust that would form, then the crust would fall off, and the nipple would look absolutely normal, and then again it would come back. And so she's had several such episodes over a period of maybe 6 months to a year, sometimes even 2 years. So that is a significant history. But the other thing that you said, a nipple retraction. So then if you say nipple retraction, if the nipple has gone in, you should be able to ask her whether this has always been the case. Okay? Because sometimes people as a developmental anomaly, this nipple could have been inside all the time, from the time that it was there always. But if it is a recent onset, that is something that should pose a question to you. Okay, so that is about the nipple. Yeah.
Continuing with the history of presentation, there is no history of loss of appetite or weight, no history of swelling in the neck, armpit, or anywhere else in the body, no history of pain in the back or abdomen, no history of swelling or pain in the arms or shoulder, and no history of swelling in the opposite breast.
So when you say no history of loss of appetite or weight, they should come probably in the end.
Yes, madam.
Yeah, because that's the last thing. Because in your mind, you're trying to pick up all those things that are going to contribute to the local disease, and then you come to things that is going to contribute to the systemic disease. Okay, so history of swelling or pain in the arm and shoulder. What are you thinking about?
It can relate to the metastatic. It can relate to the swelling in the lymph node, the lump in the axilla. May relate to the lymph nodes, and also a pain may associate with due to the lymphedema that may be caused in the case of neglected or long-standing carcinoma.
Okay, so now as we haven't examined the patients, yes, obviously you will be thinking of everything. So you will definitely want to know, is there anything which is causing local pressure in the armpit, which is giving rise to either swelling in the arm or there is pain in the arm, because sometimes large lymph nodes can press on the brachial plexus also and give rise to pain in the arm, and sometimes shoulder mobility restriction may happen if it is really a far gone case. So when you say history of pain in the back, what are you thinking of?
We would be thinking of the metastasis into the vertebrae, the bony beds.
Okay, so you're basically looking for spine.
Spine.
Right? You ask, thinking about if there is any particular area of pain in the back, meaning in the spine. Okay.
Yes,
and abdomen, pain in the abdomen, or are you looking for something like an abdominal distension?
Yes, my abdominal distension for any metastatic deposits in the liver.
Liver may occasionally present with pain, but not so commonly. But abdominal distension, when may it happen?
In ascites.
Yes, ascites because of
the tumor, this Krukenberg.
Okay, Krukenberg is one, but yeah. So what is the type of cancer which is commonly associated with Krukenberg's?
The ovarian.
So you can get it in both ductal as well as lobular carcinomas. But lobular carcinomas are known to have a larger propensity to spread to the peritoneum and give rise to ascites. So you said history of swelling in the neck, armpit, anywhere in the body. So what exactly do you mean by swelling in the neck?
With respect to next, the involvement of the supraclavicular lymph nodes. uh, or any.
Supraclavicular lymph nodes. And sometimes you can get it elsewhere also in the rest of the neck. You could have a level 2 or a level 3 lymph node also with, breast cancer. But of course, that means that so long as it is supraclavicular, it is part of the locoregional disease. The moment it goes to a level 2 or a level 3 or a level 5, you would say that it is metastatic and not locoregional disease. History of swelling in the opposite breast. What is that meant to convey?
It implies a metastatic presentation, madam. But we have to rule out. We have to also rule out any presence of any benign disease also. It can be a benign or it can be a metastatic presentation of the same disease.
Or it could be 2 primaries also.
2 primaries in a case of lobular carcinoma.
So we talk of synchronous breast cancers. That is not very uncommon. And so many times you find that there is a breast cancer on one side, there may be a fibroadenoma or a phylloids on the opposite side, or you could, like you said, if it is a lobular carcinoma, you can get patients who present with synchronous bilateral breast cancers also. So while it is important to ask in the history, it is also important in the examination. Is there anything else that anybody wants to ask so far? You can put it in the chat and then I can possibly answer those bits also. Okay, so let's, I believe it will happen when it happens. So let us go on to your examination.
Okay.
Sorry.
The past history.
Sorry, your past history is left, yeah.
Yes, coming to the past history, no history of similar complaints in the past. She's not a known case of diabetes, hypertension, TB, asthma, eclipse of coronary disease. Coming to her personal history, she takes mixed diet. Her appetite is normal, sleep is adequate, and bowel and bladder habits are normal and regular. There's no history of smoking or alcohol intake. Coming to her menstrual history, her last menstrual period was 15th of June 2020. And coming to her obstetric history, her first age at first pregnancy is 22 years, and the total number of pregnancies are 2. Her last childbirth is 26 years. She has no history of any usage of oral contraceptive pills or hormone replacement therapy. Coming to her drug history, she has no history of any documented drug allergy, no history of any long-term medication. And coming to the family history, there is no history of there is no family history with breast or ovarian or prostate cancer.
Okay, so let us start looking at what similar complaints. When you say similar complaints in the past, what are you thinking of?
Patient might have a history of any lump in the breast previously for which she had been operated on.
So how does it help? If there has been a surgery in the past, what does it convey? So if you've had surgery in the past and you know that there is a certain, lots of times, even in our country, even today, a lot of lumps are removed and they are discarded without being subjected to histopathology. Because if there is that histopathology is there, it could give us a clue as to what it was. There have been lumps which have been discarded saying it's a fibroadenoma, it could have been a phylloids, and when you're seeing the patient, it's with a recurrent phylloids. Or if there is a condition like an ADH, atypical ductal hyperplasia, or a sclerosing adenosis, or a DCIS, all these are, DCIS of course is in the spectrum of the disease, and even ADH. ADH goes on to become a DCIS, and DCIS going on to become an invasive carcinoma. So all this is part of the spectrum of the disease. So if you don't have access to that information, so obviously the patient herself is not aware of it. And so then you come back with a recurrent situation, which is always worse than the condition that you were treated for. So a lot of times a benign phylloids could come back as a borderline or a malignant. And the same goes for cancer also. Had she been treated for a DCIS earlier, which was not on record, she could possibly come back 50% times with an invasive carcinoma when it recurs. So is somebody wanting to ask? Okay, so then you said that she has no history of smoking and alcohol. So, so when you're asking these things, what is the idea?
And with respect to the smoking, patients with epilepsy has a history of smoking. Like there is relevance of epilepsy and smoking.
Not just see, smoking is actually associated with 2/3 of cancers, not just breast cancer. Plus, smoking history is important, especially if you're going to offer your patient reconstruction. You have to ensure that she's off smoking. It is not so hugely relevant, but it is becoming to be relevant in our country also. But in the West, it's a very, very common thing because the ones who smoke, the chances of flap necrosis, implant loss, and all this is much higher with those women who smoke. And alcohol is again a risk factor. So the latest WHO recommendation says there should be no alcohol. Earlier, there used to be okay with one, uh, you know, uh, once a week drinking in moderation was allowed, but now they say no alcohol intake. So these are basically risk factors. Okay. So then you said about the menstrual history. So all these are risk factors that we are discussing. So what menstrual history got in terms of risk for breast cancer?
Like menstrual history, uh, in a woman, if there is the number of years the woman has been exposed to the menstruation, is related directly to the cancer. So, a early menarche and a late menopausal will give rise to more years of exposure to the hormone exposure.
Okay. Okay. And age at first pregnancy, how is it important?
Uh,
So the earlier you have kids, it is protective. It
yes,
is
ma'am.
supposed to be protective. So they say less than 30 years, risk of breast cancer reduces as compared to those who have their kids after the age of 30. And history of OCPs and HRT,
Or they
oral
have
contraceptive also a risk factor.
this factor, but it is not like some books have said that it is related, some have said it is not. So, with respect to OCP.
Recently, there was a publication which said OCPs also for long durations can give rise to higher risk of breast cancer, but HRT has been proven
Yes, madam.
beyond doubt. Hello?
Yes, madam.
Ah. So HRT after the Oxford Million Women study that happened in 2003, 2004, it was shown that if you were to have HRT over 5 years, HRT for more than 5 years would substantially increase your risk of breast cancer to almost 4 to 5 times the general average population. So HRT used to be very popular in the 90s. A lot of women who were suffering from postmenopausal symptoms, osteoporosis, hot flushes, they used to go on to the HRT and were happy with it. But then HRT not only makes them at higher risk of developing breast cancer, it is also seen to change the what do you call the composition of your breast. Becomes very glandular, very dense. So, you can miss a lot of things on conventional mammogram. So HRT is a no-no beyond 5 years, but best is to take it for 2 years and leave it if at all you have to. So when you say family history, so which cancers and why are you asking this question?
The issue of any breast, ovarian, prostate, or in pancreatic, madam, or few cases of in gastric cancer.
So we all know that, family history, although we know that it contributes to about 10 to 20% at best, probably less than that to breast cancer. About 80 to 90% of your breast cancers are sporadic. But if there is a family history, then it becomes significant. So when we say family history, the commonest mutation that we know of is the BRCA1 mutation. And you will find that a lot of these cancers have a link, which is breast, ovarian, prostate, pancreatic, male breast cancer, any lady in the house with bilateral breast cancer, any lady with a triple negative breast cancer, all these attribute to the risk of developing breast cancer in the next generation. So these are the things that should be asked for. Even stomach cancer. So, lobular carcinoma of the breast and stomach cancers with CDH1 mutation, again, is known to be a risk. So if you have somebody who's had stomach cancer and you find somebody having a lobular, probably she has a mutation. So that is where all this comes from. Okay, go on.
So coming to general examination, the patient is conscious, coherent. She's moderately built and moderately nourished with a BMI of 23.6. There are no palar, icterus, cyanosis, clumping, lymphadenopathy, or edema. Pulse is 84 pulsation per minute, regular rhythmic, normal in volume, no radioradial and radiofemoral delay. She has a blood pressure of 130 by 80 millimeters of mercury by term supine and her respiratory rate is 16 cycles per minute, and the temperature is normal.
So in general examination, it's slightly different for different, so all those who are pursuing surgery, I would say that yes, you might as well make a mention of this, but sometimes examiners, they just want to go on to the next bit. But yes, when we're talking for BMI of 23.6, what are we trying to get at?
She's within normal BMI.
Because a higher BMI, obviously the risk of cancer also increases. Yeah, with obesity. So pallor icterus, these are basically you're trying to complete the general examination. It may not be contributory to the situation that you're dealing with, but if your examiner is interested in hearing it, you must have it on paper, but you need not necessarily go over it and just tell them that general physical examination did not reveal any abnormality, and the patient and whatever needs to be said has to be said. Okay.
Coming to the local examination, the first part, the inspection. Inspection of both breasts simultaneously. On inspection, there is asymmetry of the breast is noted.
Other thing I would like to mention here, this is something that we are so engrossed in the whole thing about examining the patient. The important thing is always, if you have an examiner also, you must say that you have to seek permission from the patient and tell her, is it okay if I examine you? Can you please disprobe yourself? Because exposure of both breasts is very, very important. The classical method of doing it is to ensure that the top clothes are off, but you must seek permission, especially if a male doctor is examining a patient, a lady, then she should always have a lady attendant also in the examination, just next to the examination couch, to prevent any sort of mishaps. Okay, so we have sought permission from the patient, and suppose you're examining the patient, there is a lady attendant also next to you. Okay, go on.
On inspection of both breasts simultaneously, there is asymmetry of the breast is noted with right breast larger compared to the left breast. Inspection of the disease, that is primarily the right breast with arms by the side. Nipple of the right breast is at a higher level compared to the left breast. There is no displacement of the nipple noted. Nipple retraction is noted on the right side. No active nipple discharge. There are no associated cracks, fissure, or ulceration over the nipple. With respect to the areola, it is normal in size with no cracks or fissure or ulceration or eczema or discharge. The skin over the right breast, no scars are noted, no scars or enclosed veins or pigmentation. There is mild redness. Apart from that, there is the PD orange is noted over the breast. There is no dimpling or retraction or nodulation or ulceration is noted.
You cannot say that PD orange noted over the lump because you've not looked at her yet. So it's basically you're able to notice PDO on the breast.
Yes,
the central quadrant or wherever the PDO is, you have to mention where the PD orange is seen or their orange. So it's a French thing. Yeah. Okay.
There is a visible lump noticed in the upper outer quadrant of about 4 into 3 centimeters with irregular surface. There is no edema of the arm noticed. With arms raised above, the nipple is divided towards the lump and a PD orange is noticed more prominently. There is no swelling or lump noted in the axilla. And with leaning forward, both the breasts are falling forward equally.
Okay, so when you say that the okay, so you've talked about the nipple.
Yes, nipple, areola, skin,
Yeah.
and lump.
So when you say that the nipple is deviated towards the lump, what do you mean?
Uh,
Why is it so?
it is the infiltration of the ducts.
Okay, so see in the so you do know there are two kind of ligaments that are running in the breast. One is going from the nipple to divide the lobules into there are 20 lobules within the breast, so that is divided by this ligaments or the fibrous sheet that runs from the nipple towards the breast.
Lobules, yes.
Yeah, so
The glandular tissue.
right, the duct system gets contracted because once that fibrous band starts getting contracted because of involvement of the disease, so the nipple can get pulled. And the other thing is the suspensory ligament.
Ligaments of Cooper.
Ligament is the Cooper's
Ligaments of Cooper.
yeah, and the Cooper's ligament runs from the
Pectoralis fascia to the skin.
dermis.
Dermis.
Superficial layer of the dermis. That is where the Cooper's ligament goes. So you're seeing both things. You're seeing the fibrous tissue along the ducts, which is getting pulled because of the involvement, and also the suspensory ligament, which gives rise to the pitting that you see along with the lymphatic channels then run through it. So that is why you see the PDO. Okay, and what else? So dimpling also happens for the same reason.
Yes.
Dimpling is again, Cooper ligament contraction because it happens on the skin away from the, usually at the edge of the tumor. That is where you would see a dimple forming, especially when you raise the hands. And the reason why the breast is able to move on the retromammary space is because of the Cooper's ligament, named after, whom is it named after? Dr. Astley Cooper. So Dr. Astley Cooper was a surgeon and an anatomist also. So you get a lot of these kind of combinations. One of the biggest names in breast surgery who actually started breast conservation, really pushed for breast conservation, was Umberto Veronesi from Italy. And he was a pathologist to start off with. And then he became a surgeon, but his pathology background is what made him more convinced that breast conservation was a surgery which could be done without having excessive local recurrences. Okay, go on.
Coming to the palpation, first initially palpation of the normal or left breast, there is no palpable lump. Palpation of the right breast, there is no local rise of temperature, no tenderness.
So that is a good thing to do, to always palpate the normal breast first. Why? Because it's the best thing that could happen to you, because you've got a reference point to see what is the normal. You've got a reference sitting just next to the other breast. So always go for the normal breast just to understand what is her normal, so that when you go to the abnormal breast, you realize that is how it compares with the normal breast. Yeah.
Palpation of the right breast, there is no local rise of temperature, there is no tenderness. A solitary oval-shaped firm to hard lump is noted in the upper outer quadrant of around 4 to 3 centimeters of right breast with irregular surface and ill-defined margin. The lump is fixed to the overlying skin. It is not freely mobile and not fixed to the underlying muscle and not fixed to the chest wall.
Okay, so there are a lot of things here. One, you said that it's an oval. That's fine. That's an oval shape. It could be any shape. A lot of times you won't find a shape if it is a malignant lump. A lot of times you may not find a shape. It is usually a very irregular lump. But yes, in some types of lumps you may find, a lot of times you would be very convinced that it's a fibroadenoma. It does not turn out to be fibroadenoma. It could be a mucinous carcinoma, or sometimes even triple negative breast carcinomas can be like that. But anyway, so this is, the shape is fine. So lump is fixed to the overlying skin. So there are 3 fixities that you have mentioned, and each of these require a little more clarity. So when you say lump is fixed to the overlying skin, what is the significance? When you say the underlying muscle, what does it mean? And when you say chest wall, what does it mean?
Involvement of the skin. Uh, should I speak with regard to staging or?
No, yes, you can. So when you say fixed to the overlying skin, does it have an impact on staging?
Yes, madam. The staging, irrespective of the size of the lump, the stage is T4B,
No,
34A. Sorry.
to the overlying skin will not change. So you have to be very
Oh,
clear.
sorry. Okay.
Yeah, whether it is skin tethering or dimpling
Or PD.
or fixity to the skin by itself will not change the stage. When you say PDO, of course, what you're saying is right. When you're saying T4B, if there is PDO, then of course that will become T4B. But lump fixed to the overlying skin will not change the stage. And then you said it is not freely mobile. So what does that mean? That it is?
Fixed within the breast tissue, madam.
Yes. So that is again a very important feature of a malignant lump. Not just malignant lump, even in inflammatory situations, you can get it like this. You know, if it is a granulomatous mastitis or sometimes in tubercular mastitis, if there is a lot of inflammation. So what is happening is, why is it not freely mobile within the breast tissue?
To the surrounding.
There is something called desmoplasia. So desmoplastic reaction, which happens around a malignant lump, is what prevents it from moving within the breast tissue. Like in a fibroadenoma, you can see that it moves very freely within the breast, but if there is tethering to the breast tissue, there is a lot of desmoplastic reaction around the lump, then you will not have the same kind of mobility. When you said fixed to underlying muscle, what is the significance?
So fixity to the, it may be fixed to the pectoralis major
Hmm.
or the serratus anterior, and fixity to the pectoralis major doesn't make it T4A.
So when you, but serratus also part of that? Or
Serratus is a part,
part
madam.
of the chest wall?
Serratus is a part of chest wall, but not the pec major.
Yeah. So when you say underlying muscle, you're probably thinking in terms of
Pec major.
Yes. When you say chest wall, what are the components of the chest wall?
The ribs, the serratus anterior, and the
Intercostal.
intercostal muscles.
Yes. So if it is fixed to any of those, then you would say then the state changes. Like you said, it becomes a 4A.
T4A.
T4A. And when you said the skin, you know, if you got PDO, what are the components? When would you say it is a T4B? When would you say that?
The ulceration,
Yeah.
PDO, and the nodular skin nodules.
Yes. Satellite nodules.
Satellite nodules.
So all these are the three things that would make it a T4B. And what is T4C?
T4C is both involvement of the skin and the chest wall.
And T4D? Inflammatory breast cancer.
Yes, inflammatory breast cancer.
Yeah. The picture that you showed probably fits into that. It may not be the same patient as you're describing, but yeah. Go on.
So coming to the examination of axilla, examination of the axillary lymph nodes. Examination of right axilla shows a firm, freely mobile level 1 group of axillary lymph of about lymph node of about 1.5 into 1 centimeter, which is palpable, and the rest of the lymph node groups are not palpable.
So when you say level 1, what group of lymph nodes are we talking about?
Level 1 include the anterior, lateral, and posterior.
So where are these located?
That is they are located lateral to the pec minor.
Okay, so how do you divide the lymph node stations? So if I say level 1, level 2, and level 3?
It is divided according to the pec minor. The pec minor, those which lie lateral to the pec minor are the level 1, which lies behind the pec minor are the level 2, that is the central group, and the rotors, and above and medial comes the level 3, which
Yes.
is in.
Yes. So the rotors, you know, there is a little bit of a controversy with rotors. There are some who classify it as level 1 and the others who say it is level 2. So it really doesn't matter. So long as you know what to do with it, it is fine. Okay. So yeah. So you said examination of the opposite axilla.
Yes, opposite axilla is there are no palpable lymph nodes, and Examination of supracarpal fossa, there is no palpable lymph nodes in the supracarpal fossa.
So supraclavicular fossa, what is the significance?
Uh, it makes the involvement of N3, man.
Yes.
N3.
So earlier, about say 15 years ago, supraclavicular lymph node was labeled as M1. Okay, but then, like you said, now it was the AJCC. I think which edition was it? I'm forgetting. It's probably the the fifth edition where they downgraded it to an N3 and made it part of the loco-regional.
Local.
But it is important to know whether it is there or not. So palpation of the supraclavicular fossa is an integral part of examination of the breast if you're looking for, if you suspect it to be a cancer. Next.
Coming to systemic examination, there is the abdomen, cardiovascular and respiratory system, and CNS are within normal limits. No abnormalities noted.
Okay, so if they specifically want to ask you something, because if you say liver is enlarged, does it have a significance? Then you should be able to say what could be the significance. CNS, if there is, what are the things that you would possibly look at? It could be, in advanced cases, you can have things like patients' difficulty in walking or speech, or you can have anything which you would expect with an intracranial SOL, seizures, all those bits. So you should know what are the manifestations, and sometimes even paraneoplastic syndromes are known to happen with breast cancer in an advanced stage. So for all practical purposes, if the examiner or whoever is asking the questions wants to go on to find out how you wants to spend more time in the management of the case, then they can leave this bit out. Yeah.
So to summarize, a 45-year-old perimenopausal lady with a lump in her right breast for the last 3 months with a gradual increase in size. In examination, there is a 4 into 3 centimeter formed to hard lump noted in upper outer quadrant of right breast, which was fixed to breast tissue and noted video orange changes. There is no chest wall or pectoral muscle fixity. There is a palpable firm axillary lymph node at level 1, and there are no systemic signs of metastasis.
So when you summarize, you should say that is a 45-year-old lady, a perimenopausal lady with a lump in the right breast, which on examination measures 4 into 3 centimeters and has skin changes suggestive of PDO with no fixation and a palpable axillary node with no signs of systemic metastasis. Okay, it has to happen in one line. Okay.
So coming to my...
Then I would, what is your differential diagnosis? So usually in general surgery, for the students who appear for exams, this is what they would be asked. So they may ask you, what is your diagnosis? Then you should be able to say that I would like to present my differential diagnosis, and then you can put it as 1, 2, 3 in the order that you think is most likely. Yeah.
With respect to this case, being an elderly woman, a perimenopausal, with a history of lump for the past 3 months, an involvement of the skin, and a palpable lymph node, my provisional diagnosis would be a case of carcinoma at breast.
Mm-hmm.
With a clinical staging of T4B due to involvement of the skin, and N1, the involvement of the axial lymph node, and since we are not further evaluated for metastatic evaluation has not been done. Presently, I state it as MX.
Okay. Okay, go on. So that's your provisional diagnosis. So now we have, what will be your next step? How will you manage this patient? So when I say manage this patient, how will you go about tackling this patient?
We will be first initially confirming our diagnosis. So to confirm our diagnosis, I would like to go for a mammography because she is an elderly woman, more than 39 years of age. And if required, a ultrasound association of the mammography and a core biopsy of the lump. a ultrasound guided core biopsy.
Let us get this like this. If there
Okay.
is a lump in the breast which you think is cancer, so the first step is of course diagnosis. So when you do diagnosis, what are the things that you could do? How do you arrive at a diagnosis? Diagnosis in all breast lumps should be by a
Triple examination.
triple assessment.
Triple assessment.
One, the clinical examination. The second bit is imaging.
Imaging.
And imaging, like you said, it would be a mammogram. So in a mammogram, what is the thing that you're likely to find? What would you, if I were to do a mammogram in this case with PDO and all that, so what are the likely clinical, radiological findings that you could see? On mammogram, what would you see?
This we look at the size of the lump. It's the architectural distortion, like which is more significant in breast cancer.
Okay, so what are the things you would see in mammogram?
The calcification, madam.
So one
micro calcification.
So there could be a lesion, no? There could be a
lesion.
Yeah, there could be a density, which could be with it could be a lobulated density, or it could be a lesion with spiculations. Although in this it is not classically seen, but you could have spiculations. What else?
Microcalcification.
So what kind of microcalcifications are we talking about? We're talking of pleomorphic calcification, because segmental in distribution, which could be branching pleomorphic segmental distribution of microcalcifications. That is what would make it suspicious. Okay. Then
involvement of skin.
Involvement of skin is seen as a thickening of the skin. If you look at this one, on the left side, you can see quite a bit of thickening of skin. And whenever you do a what do you call a mammogram, you would do it in two views, right?
Yes.
It has to be a ML view as well as a CC view. So if I were to say, so how do you know on a mammogram whether it is upper outer or lower outer or upper inner? How do you make that out on mammogram?
In a
question. This has got nothing to do with this one, but just for asking you.
In a craniocaudal, the one with the marking is the outer man.
Sorry?
In a craniocaudal view, the one with the mark is the outer.
Yes. So whenever a mammogram is done, so these markers are very, very, very important. Sometimes you see that this marker is not there at all, and you're left to guess as to what is what. But that marker is very important. Like you see on your this thing is that RMLO is written, so there should be an RCC and an LCC also. So the point where the LCC is what? Is the outer half.
Outer half of the breast.
Is the outer half of the breast. If it is RCC, that is where the marker is placed. That is the outer. And when you do MLO can give you, there is, even without the marker, you can make out on the MLO view. Because you can see the pectoralis major muscle. A good mammogram should capture the edge of the pectoralis major. So the pectoralis major is obviously going to be up. Okay. Yes. So so you're able to say upper or lower on the basis of an MLO view, and an outer or an inner on the basis of a CC. So CC view tells you outer inner, and upper lower is going to be revealed by the MLO. So it is very simple. A lot of times, you can get these X-rays as one of the things that could be asked of you in your short, what do you call those little things that they do in the exam. And then you should be able to say very clearly as to which part of the breast the tumor lies in. Okay. Other than that, the very important thing for mammograms is that BI-RADS category is very, very important. So if you don't mention a BI-RADS category, then that report is kind of meaningless. You can give a description, but you should be able to tell us what the BI-RADS scoring is. What is the BI-RADS score?
So BI-RADS is a breast imaging and data reporting system. It is of 6 categories, madam. So category 0 it is normal.
Zero
Category,
is not normal.
sorry,
Zero
it needs
means
further investigation.
exactly.
So category 1 is normal. Category 2 is benign.
Mhm.
Category 3 is probably benign. Category 4 is probably malignant, and category 5 is malignant, and category 6
Category
is
is when you already have histological
biopsy confirmed.
yes. In a biopsy confirmed case, you see pick up something on this thing, you call it a BIRAD 6, on which on the biopsy it has already been confirmed or a negative.
Confirmed.
So that is BIRAD 6. So okay, so this lexicon is very, very important. You must, and so when you look at the breast, there are other things also that you need to see. You should always comment on the density of the breast also. So what is the grading of the density?
So there are 4 grades from A, B, C, D.
Which was earlier 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So 1, 2, 3,
So
4 been replaced by A, B, C.
A, B, C, D to not get confused with the category.
So what is A?
Uh, D is the more denser one. A is
Least dense.
least dense.
A is fatty breast.
Fatty breast.
What you're seeing is a lot of this, the black. There's a lot of black in it. Black in, it's kind of black or rather gray. It's all gray. Okay, so there is hardly any glandular tissue there. So that is A. What is B?
B is
It's mostly fat. There are very minimum patches of white, which is glandular tissue. Then C is more areas of white again. You could have half the breast could be just especially towards the muscle could be gray, and the rest of it could be white. And D is dense. So it is D and dense. So that's how you'll remember it. So A is the least dense and D is most dense. So that is how it is. So this is of importance. This is of clinical significance because nowadays we talk a lot about oncoplasty and things. So there, the density of the breast is something that is very, very important to understand before you embark on an oncoplastic procedure. Okay, yeah. So now you have done the mammogram. Okay. Then what would you do?
You could go for a biopsy, core biopsy.
How will you do the core biopsy?
A ultrasound guided is more preferable instead of a blind technique.
That is the standard of care. You should go for an ultrasound guided biopsy, especially in this kind of situation. If there is so much of skin thickening and there is a likelihood that you will not be able to palpate a definite lump. Like in this case, of course, you did manage to palpate a lump, but then even if you have that big a lump, I would still go for an ultrasound guided core biopsy. And why?
Because there might be a central necrotic component which might give a false result. Apart from that, there might be a cystic component and a mixed component like cystic and solid, where a biopsy from a cystic could give a benign lesion, which could be missed in the during the process.
Yes, so it has to be preferably be under ultrasound guidance. So, and what are the ultrasound features of a malignant lump?
The lump is taller
Than wider, yes.
than wider.
The margins would be irregular.
Margins are irregular.
Or it could have microlobulations.
Okay.
The big lobulations, you would think of fibroadenoma. Microlobulations, it's suspicious. Then there is posterior acoustic shadow.
Posterior acoustic shadow.
So these are and sometimes you can even pick up with these ultrasounds of current days, where the resolution is excellent. You can even pick up microcalcifications on ultrasound. Okay, and then so you've done an ultrasound guided core biopsy, and will you do something else also? You said there is a lymph node in the axilla.
An FNAC of the lymph node.
Would you not do an FNAC from that lymph node?
Yes, madam. FNS of the lymph node.
FNAC or a biopsy, whichever your radiologist is comfortable with. It is important to know the status of the axilla also for sure, because you know, by and large, you know, by your clinical examination itself, you know that this person is not going to go for surgery.
Yes.
So you need to know the status of the lymph node also, because if this lymph node, suppose it was not so advanced and you still had a lymph node, not so much of PDO, it's just a lump in the breast with a lymph node, you would want to know whether that lymph node is actually part of the disease or not, because that can have an impact on how you treat the axilla when she comes back for surgery after completing her chemotherapy. So that is why you need to do an FNAC of the lymph node also. So what, okay, so let me say that this is an IDC, it is grade 3. Would you do anything else? Why do you want to do an FNAC? We see that there are so many FNACs being done, even in a situation like this where you know that she's not going to have surgery first. A lot of times you find that FNACs are done and there is no core biopsy. So why is it that we prefer to do a core biopsy as against an FNAC?
But core biopsy advantages of the FNAC in terms of the differentiate between in situ and invasive carcinoma. Apart from that, it also gives the receptor status of the
Yes.
for which we can accordingly plan whether the type of chemotherapy. The further management could be planned according to the receptor status.
So that's very, very important, that we need to know the biology of disease, and because that will have an impact on how we do the treatment. Suppose if there was no PD orange and this was about 3 centimeters and there was a lymph node in the axilla, and I were to say that this is ER/PR negative, HER2 positive with a Ki67 of say 50%, what would be my approach? I'm saying it is 3 centimeter lump with a lymph node in the axilla. How would I treat that patient? And I say, okay, the staging workup is all negative.
So we can the lymph node is negative number.
Lymph node is positive.
Positive. Okay. So we can
T2N1,
mhm.
T2N1, ER/PR negative, HER2 positive with a Ki67 of 50%. So this is what I meant when I said this is very important information. Had this patient been a T2N1 with an ER/PR positive, HER2 negative, and a Ki67 of say 14% or 15% or 16%, I would have gone ahead with surgery. T2N1. I'm not talking about this case, I'm just putting it hypothetically. If it is T2N1 with an ER/PR, this is to just highlight the importance of doing the receptor status before you embark on treatment. But with this situation, with an ER/PR negative and a HER2 positive and a Ki67 of 50%, a grade 3 tumor with a node positive, I would go ahead with neoadjuvant chemotherapy and targeted treatment before embarking on surgery. The same would have happened had it been triple negative. So these are the two subsets where the treatment will actually hinge on what is the receptor status, which is triple negative and HER2 positive. But if she is ER/PR positive, HER2 negative, I would err on the side of doing surgery. But you know, in a luminal B, where if I were to say that her ER/PR positivity is not that great, her HER2 was negative, and her Ki67 was like 60-70%, you can consider doing chemotherapy there. But the two subsets where there is very good clarity on what to do is the triple negative and the HER2 positive. Okay, right. I've deviated a bit from. I've gotten to the last bit of it, but anyways, what would be your staging?
So
now you have the report. I have told you she's ER/PR negative, HER2 positive, with the node also is positive and FNAC. So what would be your? What is your staging now? It is
stage 3B.
Okay, this is stage 3B because it is T4B. Anything T4B, any nodal status T4B makes it a stage 3B. Okay, so so I've told you. So now what do? You made a diagnosis. Whether it is actually stage 3B or is it? How will you know? Well, I think it could be stage 4. How will you know whether it's stage 4 or not?
So we have to do the metastatic workup now.
Yeah, so very simply put, in any cancer, first step is diagnosis, second step is staging. So that is where we are. So treatment happens third, you cannot do it in reverse order. If you were to do it in reverse order, obviously you're doing a grave injustice to the patient, because you lose a lot of information whenever you do things in reverse. So it has to be diagnosis, staging, then treatment. Okay, so what will be your staging investigation in this case?
With respect to this case, I would like to go for a uh, CT chest and CT abdomen, and
Hmm.
also a whole body bone scan
Okay,
to rule out any bone metastasis.
right. So there you can do a CT chest, abdomen, and a bone scan, or
Or altogether, we can go for a PET scan.
so yeah. So in this situation, you are justified in doing a PET CT. Okay, but if you look at a stage 1 and a stage 2, you would not opt for a PET CT. In nodal positive disease or in locally advanced situation, you can get away with CT chest, abdomen, and a bone scan. But if you want one investigation which gives you all the information, you can do a PET CT. So you're not wrong in saying a PET CT in this situation. Okay, so I say that now this patient has no evidence of metastasis on say the PET CT. There is no evidence of metastasis. So suppose I were to say she doesn't have metastasis, but there is an internal mammary node that I can see on the right side. So does your state change? Obviously, the higher
N2.
stage will
Yes,
take,
ma'am.
because you know it is an N3.
N3.
It is a stage 3B.
Stage 3B, ma'am. It involves both the axillary and the internal mammary.
And supraclav also.
And supraclavian.
It's still stage 3B.
Oh, no, no, ma'am. If it involves the supraclavian node, it is 3C.
Hmm. So that is the catch. Okay. Okay. So anyway, so now even the internal mammary is also not going to change the way you're going to treat this patient. Okay. Yeah. So now the staging is done. Okay. So now how will you treat this patient?
So considering
Are PR negative or two positive?
we'll bring it's a local advanced carcinoma breast, LABC.
But just give me a sequence of the treatment. You don't have to tell me everything in detail, but just give
Okay,
me a
madam. Neoadjuvant chemotherapy plus targeted therapy, followed by breast surgery.
what surgery will you do?
Madam, with respect to this case, with a extensive video orange, it is the best thing is to go for a modified radical mastectomy.
Okay. Okay.
And
Let me also tell you here that because there is extensive PDO, that's the reason why we are saying that she may not be a candidate for breast conservation after neoadjuvant chemotherapy. But if it is a T2 tumor or a T3 tumor, N1, you can consider doing breast conservation surgery after downsizing the disease. It is not as if that all patients who get neoadjuvant chemotherapy will end up with an MRM, but in this situation, like your case, where the extent of PDO is large, there you should possibly not be considering mastectomy. Breast conservation. Yeah. Okay, so you would do a neoadjuvant chemotherapy with targeted treatment, followed by surgery, followed by radiation. So this, when you're having these multidisciplinary meetings, the reason why I brought up the internal mammary is also because your radiation oncologist needs to know if there is an internal mammary, because does she want to do anything different for it is a decision that she has to make depending on how the patient responds to treatment. Whether you should be doing anything for the supraclavicular node, very, very controversial. I don't even want to go that way. But otherwise, for supraclavicular lymph node, if it continues to remain, then one should even be considering doing a supraclavicular lymph node fossa clearance. If there is a lymph node which persists even after your chemo and targeted treatment. And targeted treatment will go on for
5 years.
Or 1 year.
Sorry, 1 year.
5 years is hormonal, but she's not a candidate for hormonal because her ERPR is negative, so she's not a candidate for hormonal treatment. Okay, So that brings us to the end of this case. Okay, so I have a question which says, are internal memory nodes visible when enlarged? Well, internal memory nodes are not palpable. So whenever we say staging, when we're talking about clinical staging, you're also talking in terms of imaging. And when you're talking internal memory nodes will be picked up on a CT scan. So in a locally advanced situation, when you do a CT chest or a PET CT, that is when you will pick up an internal memory node. And that will go into your clinical staging as well. Are there any other questions? I'll be happy to answer.
Man, it's a wonderful discussion indeed. Very, very informative, educative, and I'm sure we'll have many more classes from me. Any questions from the audience? Dr. Anjali, you want to say something?
So Dr. Nilesh has been asking me, is percussion able to identify internal memory nodes? Well, I haven't tried it, but I don't think it would be able to identify it because it's really tiny. It is so close to the sternum, actually just behind the sternum, in fact, where the internal memory runs, a memory artery runs. Very, very difficult to pick up on percussion.
Dr. Anjali?
No, sir. No, sir. Went very well, sir. Very nice. Congratulations, Dr. Geeta, madam.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Sajja, what I meant, So if that is what you meant, visible on CT scan. I'm sorry, I did not get it. Yes, that's what you're right. So visible on CT scan, that is when an internal memory will be picked up. And so internal memory is not usually visualized at all. So if you were to see an internal memory node on a CT scan or a PET CT, it is taken as pathological unless proved otherwise.
Dr. Ashok Kumar, you have any questions?
The second one.
Yeah, I do have any. Hello.
Yes.
Asha, I have a question for Dr. Geeta. One
Yes.
is how to deal with the supraclavicular lymph nodes if it didn't respond to the chemotherapy, number one.
Yes,
And
so
number
that's
two,
what I would say.
Another one, Professor Askin.
Yes.
And the other thing was
He closed his
the
camera.
clinical,
So
the
his,
clinical. Hello.
appear like this.
Hello.
Not open his camera like this.
Hello.
So,
Yeah, yes, Dr. Ashok, yeah.
The clinical staging was T4B N1MX. I think in 8th edition of AGCC has removed the MX. It's either M0 or M1. It's not MX.
so MX essentially means nothing. MX actually means that you have not looked for metastasis. So once you've done the staging workup, then the MX goes and it becomes either an M0 or an M1. It is only something that is kept in abeyance. It does not mean anything. You're right.
My question remains, ma'am.
Yes,
Yeah.
If the supraclavicular node has not responded to chemotherapy, then you can feel it. Then you can deal with it with surgery by doing a supraclavicular fossa clearance. Or if it has responded in a manner that you can't feel it, it is still there. And if it is a large matted lymph node to start off with, say it's a 2.5 centimeter the lymph node, a size of a 2.5 centimeter, you should consider doing a supraclavicular fossa clearance. But if it disappears completely and there is nothing for you to feel, then the radiation oncologist will definitely take it in his or her field while treating the breast after the surgery is over.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Dr. Hassan, you were saying something. Sorry. Dr. Hassan? Yeah. Any more questions from the audience?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
You ask me, doctor.
Yes, yes, I did. Yes.
Good discussion, and I have benefit from this attending this discussion.
Okay.
Only I want to ask about sentinel lymph node. Is the candidate make the sentinel lymph node first or go direct after all investigation to make mastectomy and axillary clearance? I want to ask this only.
In this situation where you have such extensive skin involvement with the largest tumor, I would not do a sentinel node biopsy at all. If you look at the data from the West, where you have people, doing a sentinel lymph node biopsy after neoadjuvant chemotherapy are primarily those patients in whom large tumors have been downsized so that they can achieve breast conservation, and at the same time there were no nodes to start off with. The node were negative to start off with. In that situation, I think you are justified in doing sentinel node biopsy, and that is the only subset in which I would also do a sentinel node biopsy, because suppose there is a patient who's a 3 centimeter or a 4 centimeter tumor. In triple negative breast cancer, you can have a 4 centimeter tumor with no lymph nodal involvement. In that case, I would do the neoadjuvant chemotherapy to downsize the tumor to make it conservation worthy. And then I would offer this patient sentinel node biopsy even after a neoadjuvant chemotherapy, but not otherwise. Not in this situation. It has to be a mastectomy with axillary.
Yes, because this is advanced, yes.
Absolutely.
But I have experienced one case, 3 centimeter breast lump, and I take 5 needle aspiration. I found it is malignant cells. And we start neoadjuvant chemotherapy. The mass is disappearance.
Yes.
She went to another colleague and he make another mammograms and he don't find any, maybe masked by these downstaging by neoadjuvant. And he left here because he said, I don't find, but I told him that I make downstaging, must be proceed in the mastectomy to, why I give neoadjuvant? Disappear maybe. And after that, it has become aggressive and the patient negligence. So we don't depend about, must be one responsible for the patient and must follow all the data collected, because patient will be lost between the opinion of other doctors and other consultation.
Yes.
This is why.
So, when you have a plan, see, whenever I think, I'm doing this patient for downstaging, or I think that this patient is going to be amenable to breast conservation surgery after neoadjuvant, there are some things that I would do to, because I know she can have a complete response. Like this patient, had she just been a T2N1 with an ER/PR negative, HER2 positive, after chemotherapy and targeted treatment, this tumor may disappear. So I have to do an ultrasound guided clip placement. I would do a clip placement after, say, 2 cycles of chemotherapy.
But if this appear completely, what do you do?
The clip is there. So clip is there. It has disappeared completely. It doesn't matter. So our interventional radiologist will put in a wire to the clip.
Yes, to demark.
A J wire into the clip. And then guided by the J wire, I would do an excision around the clip. And then do a specimen mammogram to ensure that the clip is out along with the wire. So that is what we would do.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions from the audience?
Yeah, sir. I have a question again.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Ma'am, in this case, the case that was presented today, there was fixity to the skin.
Yes.
What do you think? Can there be fixity to the skin without involvement to the skin?
Fixity to the skin does not change the stage.
No, that I agree, isn't it? But fixity to the skin, what does it mean? It's fixed to the skin, but that's involved, isn't it?
It is involved, but it does not, the thing is, depends upon where the tumor is. If the tumor is close to the skin, it will infiltrate the skin, It is the same thing as deep tumors. You have, the pectoralis major. It does not change the stage, but you would probably take a sliver of pectoralis major if you decide to go ahead and excise that lump. Same is the case here. If there is fixity to the skin, it is only having an impact on how you're going to treat this person surgically. But otherwise, yes, technically what you're saying is, after all, it is involvement of skin because it has onto the dermis, But the thing is, it does not find place in the staging, and it probably does not impact staging.
That's surprising. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
Even the POD is involvement of the skin, where it is not completely going to the epidermis. Because subdermal lymphatics,
some amount of lymphatic involvement and all that. This is a direct infiltration. So when you say, skin fixity, you're talking about direct infiltration because it has nowhere else to go. So it goes into the skin. So probably that is the reason why it has been omitted from the staging. But yes, what you say makes sense,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so there is a question from Dr. Shalini. Per rectal examination and after breast examination, excellent question. But I just wonder how many of us do that. But then in an advanced situation, you should possibly do, because you can find a Blummer shelf-like thing even in breast cancers, especially if there is a Kuchenberg's tumor. You can find nodules there. But it happens far and few, so probably you can omit it. You don't have to. But if somebody were to ask you, you should know why that question is asked. The other question is breast conservative surgery after neoadjuvant is it advisable or mastectomy advised, even after there is no palpable lump, or in radiological and there is no lump? Does that affect local recurrence and survival? Okay, so breast conservative surgery after neoadjuvant chemotherapy, like I said, in select cases, you can do a breast conservation surgery. But if there is extensive skin involvement, I would not recommend it. But I'm telling you, only yesterday, I was bullied into doing breast conservative surgery in a patient who had extensive skin involvement, although a tumor size to start off with was about 5 centimeters. But then it's not advisable. Okay, but like I already mentioned, but if it is a stage 3A, till 3A, it is fine. Till 3A, you can put the patient through breast conservation after your neoadjuvant chemotherapy. When it's 3B, I would be a little skeptical, unless, of course, the PDO is localized. It's not extensive. If it is extensive PDO 3B, I would not do a breast conservative surgery. And in terms of local recurrence, like this patient I told you who bullied me into doing it, I've already told her that the risk of local recurrence will be in the range of 15 to 20%. Unlike our usual conservative surgeries where the local recurrence rate is 5 to 6%. So this will definitely be higher in a patient where you know that there is a lump with PDO and you're going ahead and doing breast conservation. Survival, well, local recurrence has not really been seen to adversely affect final outcomes, overall survival outcomes, but it is very demoralizing for the patient in the sense that if you have a recurrence, then she will be going through the entire gamut of treatment again, which can be very, very demoralizing.
Any further questions, comments?
Geeta madam, one query. Now, if we come across a patient with a pyeloid tumor, and we usually do a true cut biopsy nowadays. On true cut biopsy, we could not diagnose whether it is a malignant pyeloid or a benign pyeloid and what is the actually grading of the tumor. So in such situations, whenever these large fibroids they present, they have multiple spots involving skin, and they are usually 20 to 25-year females. So how should we go with such tumors, although it is not related with this case?
I know this is the commonest, so I've been asking Dr. Naresh also to, look at phylloids data, because phylloids is such a difficult, situation that we all find ourselves in, because our phylloids also are so huge. And like you said, phylloids is the only one situation where even a core biopsy can fail to tell you what it is. It will just say fibroepithelial lesion or a stromoepithelial lesion, maybe fibroadenoma, maybe a phylloid. So you go in, but if somebody is said as a option benign phylloids, I would always do a wide excision. Okay. But and if the tumor is very big, if the tumor is very big, you must always counsel the patient that if there is a possibility that you may want to go back in again, because sometimes even big tumors can be benign.
Right.
Then you will have to add some form of oncoplasty, which I would say you should do a perforator-based oncoplasty and not go for LD flaps and things, because then you would exhaust that option if she needs a reconstruction later on. And suppose the histopathology does turn out to be malignant phylloids and the margins are not good enough, and you may have to go back and do a mastectomy. So leave the LD aside and try and do a perforator-based flap to fill up the defect. Yeah.
Any more questions, please? I think it's quite an exhaustive session for you, Dr. Geeta. It's a wonderful session. And I should congratulate Naresh. He's presented so well. When I've been
Yes.
seeing so many students presenting. Naresh, very well done.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I keep telling I keep telling everybody that I keep learning from people who join me, and I'm very fortunate. He's the third breast fellow in our unit, and from each one of them, I have learned a lot. That is something that I know. So I'm learning a lot. He's very technologically savvy, so so I'm learning a lot from him.
Nice. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for.
Thank you for the opportunity, and
Yeah.
have a great
Yeah,
evening.
we want this series to continue.
Absolutely.
So I'll wait for the next session. Thank you
Certainly.
all. Thanks so much. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks, Naresh.
Thank you, sir.